Hey, well, good morning, good afternoon, Bilal.
Yeah.
Um, Hi, everybody. My name is Dominique Clayton. I am an independent curator, an art dealer, and an art writer, and I had the pleasure of guest curating this exhibition, The Audacity of Abstraction, which is a survey of artworks by the late artist Barry Charles Johnson, who is a Harlem born and bred amazing, incredible man, artist that I wish I had the pleasure of meeting and knowing. And this exhibition opened earlier in November at Long Gallery in Harlem, which was founded by art dealer and patron Louis Long. And I have here with me Bilal Hefner, who's an amazing filmmaker who, alongside my curation, also crafted together the story of this incredible artist, and this documentary, which runs alongside the exhibition, features people from Barry's life, his family, his home, his art practice, and I will let Bilal share a little bit about who he is and what he was able to do in the short amount of time that we put together the show and what's next. So, Bilal, please tell us what do you do? How are you? How did you come to making documentaries?
Thanks, Dominique. Yes, my name is Bilal Hefner, filmmaker from Atlanta, Georgia. I came into film around 2020 after majoring in business at Morehouse College, and my pivot took me to New York, where now I'm in school in my last year at the NYU Tisch film program, while I wrap up and walk in May. And when I was tasked with this project, Lewis told me a little bit about it, but not much. And so he was talking briefly about Barry and the artwork and how he came to acquire all these pieces. And then he kind of sent me off to talk to people who knew him, his friend in his building, and his nephew, Devin Eggleton, and then also his sister, his younger sister. Cheryl Johnson. Um, and so over the course of, I want to say a month and a half, maybe 2 months, I sat down with about 12 or 13 people, family and friends, who, had the pleasure of knowing Barry all through his life and kind of gave me a lot of context behind the artwork and the artist himself. And Lewis tasked me with kind of developing a documentary piece, a small piece that would, kind of add to the artwork in the gallery and, kind of talk about his legacy, because he was a lesser known artist who hung around a lot of other big artists at the time, who also didn't get their due as
Right.
well. And so this was an important piece just to get, his name out there and, being an artist in the late 1960s and his art showing at the Studio Museum, their first exhibition. So it was
Mm-hmm.
definitely, a full circle moment for him and for myself as well.
I love that. Well, you definitely achieved some brilliance here, and I will say that, before I got into the art world, I myself was also a filmmaker, and living in New York has a lot to do with that too. So I went to Columbia and studied film and, spent a lot of time walking around Harlem. And I love that, there's still students of the practice of film, at NYU, at Columbia, elsewhere, because now, I mean, we're in this society of like such fast consumption, like people just scroll through
Hmm.
everyone's lives throughout the day without
Hmm.
really any deep connection. And I think that we've gotten spoiled because, you might meet somebody and then it's like, oh, what's your IG or what's your whatever, and then, within 5 minutes you've like learned everything about them,
Right.
or based on what they have put into their curated collection of photos and films.
Exactly.
On the one hand, that's great because we can kind of create our own sort of archive of our lives and tell our own stories, for people to share, to learn about us. But on the other hand, doing stuff like that in real time, it's like, are we even really living, you know? And so I try to, I always lean, I'm a nerd in that way, which is probably why I found myself into art and working with, older artists, deceased artists, because there's such richness there that these people were able to do amazing things without any cameras around, without, phones and stuff to capture their every detail. And so the fact that there's so much substance to their lives that we can look, piece together these stories based on based on their artwork, based on things that their friends have told us, and there's still such a rich tale to be told. Imagine if he did have a phone and like was walking
Right.
around with these cool artists and friends back in the day.
Right.
That would just be beyond. So I love that you are still honoring the tradition of storytelling through film,
Mhm.
which is really important. And I think it enhances the show significantly because we don't have his voice.
Yeah.
But yet, when I watched the footage that you put together with his friends and family, I could feel him and I can almost hear him sort of agreeing with everyone's comments, or maybe not agreeing with them. So we can only imagine. Um, One thing I will ask you now is, was there anything surprising, like, as you were sort of reaching out to this community of people who knew him? There's also, I know that there's a few people that Lewis and I had contacted that weren't even aware that he had passed away.
Mm.
And so, there was like the shock, the discovery, and then also people who knew him but maybe didn't know this side of him as a painter, but knew him as a neighbor. So was there anything really interesting that you discovered in putting together this film, and, or people that you wish you had been able to talk to?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think that, like you mentioned, even just you and Lewis calling people about, his passing, about this work, and them kind of, almost being caught off guard with the passing of Barry. One thing about being an artist is you kind of, there's the artist side, the creative side, then there's the business side of art. And I think not everyone has that natural tendency to kind of put themselves out there and communicate to everybody. Some people just like, being in their own space doing their art, where not everyone has the eye on them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's some pros and cons to that. But while talking with people, I found because I had my own ignorance in the art world, is where I didn't know who Joe Overstreet was at the time. I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
much about Ed Clark or the other people that Barry kind of hung around with, Norman Lewis. And so I was getting educated as well as educating people I was talking to about him being an artist, because people in his building at 270 St. Nicholas Avenue, some of those people one, didn't know he was an artist, or two, has have not seen all of his art pieces. And so when I
Mm-hmm.
brought them to the gallery to be interviewed, they walked in, they can see all of Barry's work on the wall. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
that was maybe like a quarter of his work that was found by Devin and Lewis from his studio. But they were kind of blown away by those pieces,
Mm-hmm.
because they might have seen the landscape paintings, but not the abstract paintings. They might have
Mm-hmm.
seen the 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 um the the chalk paintings,
Mm-hmm.
and not everything else. And so for me, it was important to talk about what he had done and kind of just see the surprise in their face once, I give them more context
Mm-hmm.
to the person that they thought they knew.
Right.
And when talking with Cheryl Green, she was talking about how he passed away and how it was very abrupt. And really, what I got from everybody was that there was no formal goodbye to Barry.
Yeah.
And so this kind of served as that, as well as a plethora of other things that goes back into him and into his work. And so really just it was a process of discovery through and through.
Mm-hmm.
And I think everyone learns something just by sitting down and
Yeah.
having these conversations.
It also just reminds us, like, there's so much we take for granted in our everyday life, and like that you might see this person again, or that you might go back to this place, or you might whatever. And oftentimes, we don't. When we think about like our elders or grandparents or just older Black people who didn't have the same privileges that we have today,
Yeah.
the mobility to just go anywhere, and the education we can pursue, the careers we can have. I think that it was really bold and inspiring that a man like him, in the 60s and 70s would even pursue, art in that way, as opposed to, many of his peers who just went on to professional degrees and services. And, I think that especially for a man to choose art and stuff over labor, really, is really profound, and it's special. And I think, knowing that he didn't have a family of his own, and maybe things would have been different had he been married and had kids. And I know a lot of artists, even today, have to make the choice, like, do I raise my
Yeah.
family or do I do this full time? And so he knew early on, and I think that's really kind and generous and honest of him, that he said, I'm going to live this life this way,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to do this other traditional life, that, maybe he saw was very limiting, for a lot of the men in his circle.
Yeah.
And
And even his nephew Devin mentioned that, you know, I guess his relationships with people and girlfriends at the time did suffer because he knew art and Barry kind of went together hand in hand, and his
Yeah,
paintings were his children. And so
yeah,
he treated them as such for the most part. And so I think that was, and of course, the artist that he hung out with, that was his family.
yeah,
His paintings were his children. And so I
yeah.
think he definitely chose early on that this was the path to go down.
Well, it's clear, and I think, I love that, when we thought about, what all we were going to do around the show, the film being one of it, and obviously the selection of works and writing about the work. um but yeah, the gathering of people, to sort of honor his babies, which are these paintings,
Yeah.
and his drawings, and all the other objects and projects that he did while he was alive, which, we've been, discovering, through the family. So yeah, I know that there's so much more, to share and to see, to talk about. And for all of you guys tuning in, please, one, go see the art in person at the gallery. Two, spend some time sort of understanding what Black artists' life was in the 60s and 70s. And you can kind of learn more about that, even just looking at the timeline of exhibitions and artists that are on view at the Studio Museum right now, that just reopened. There's a whole timeline that kind of starts from the museum's origin until where it's at today. And you can see, like, right in that sweet spot when Barry was showing there in the, in 69, which his sister talks about too. She remembers the work that he made there. And so just to think of, like, what all these other people were doing at that same time, and he was a part of that. Um, and then the third thing is, yeah, watch this documentary that Bilal has made, where you can, learn and see, stories from his sister, his nephew, his friends, his partners, his neighbors, obviously Lewis and other, art dealers who knew him. So, this is just the beginning, I think, of really recrafting the legacy of, someone who was clearly brilliant, kind, loving, and well loved. And this first sort of chapter of his story is, ready for viewing, live, ready to go. And then, we're going to come back together to talk about sort of the rest of, his art practice, and how we can support Barry's legacy today. So thank you, Bilal, for your work, and everybody, you guys can check out. Where can they see, the documentary?
They can see the documentary, of course, at the gallery in person, and then we're gonna put the full documentary once it's out on the Lewis Long uh, Gallery Harlem website,
Okay.
and then maybe a YouTube link as well.
YouTube, yes, all connected across all the channels.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for your time. Thank you, obviously, to Lewis Long Gallery in Harlem, which is, open for all of you guys to go and visit. It's a great opportunity to get the family together, take a trip to Harlem, walk around the block, see some art. And also thank you to Barry and his family, for being so open and generous with their time, especially in their moment of grief. But I think this is a lesson to all of us that, as we think about our elders and other people in our life who are, close to their transitions, is, what stories, what objects, what memories can we capture? And so, yeah, we'll talk more about that the next time we convene. And thanks again, Bilal,
Yeah.
and we'll see you guys all at the gallery.
Yeah. See y'all soon. Thank you for having
Thank
me, Dominique.
you.
Take care.